Into law school live session this Friday. I am Monique, an associate law school consultant here at S. Montgomery Admissions Consulting, where we specialize in working with first generation and minority law school applicants. I am so excited for today's chat. I have been working with a lot of students who are actually headed towards tomorrow's LSAT exam. And so as folks think about approaching the LSAT, thinking about the LSAT, and maybe going on taking it in a few months, I want folks to keep in mind questions around LSAT accommodations and what they are, having all the information that you might need to best approach that question and to not be afraid of it, and to not feel confused around if that might be the right fit for you. And so today I am so excited and honored to be joined by Jasmeene Burton-Martin, who is actually going to introduce herself, but I would love to hear her perspective on these issues. So Jasmeene, take it over.
Oh, hi. Thanks, Monique. For those who don't know me, I feel like I've been in bits and pieces on the site over the year, singular. But I am a second year law student at Northwestern. I'm originally from Southern California, and I braved the cold to, study education policy, although law school is a broad thing. And I discovered that that was my passion, through working in various government organizations. But really, when I worked with Sydney through the consulting process, it really helped me hone in like that that's really what I wanted to do for law school. A little bit about like LSAT, the process. I actually took the very first LSAT Flex, so right when they were starting to come out of the pandemic and do it virtual, and then they kept it virtual. So I feel like I've seen this change through the course of the pandemic, which is pretty cool. It's been over a year. Yeah, 2022. But I started tutoring actually like in the middle of my studying for the LSAT. I was in study groups, and it ended up becoming this cool thing where, you start like explaining stuff to people, and you're like, wait, it helps me, but it's also like really effective. And it kind of just became something I did as I was waiting for my applications to come back, and then even as a first year. Um, and through that process, like also what comes really naturally with studying for the LSAT are questions about accommodations. I myself have a couple of disabilities that, I had to go through the accommodations process myself. And I think that, LSAC has a lot more guidance than it did a year ago. They're getting better with being more transparent about what's required. But I've definitely helped a lot of people. I think at this point, like over 40, almost 50 people get accommodations on the LSAT. And it's like something that I'm very passionate about because I think, the more that you can advocate for yourself, we just don't realize things are available, but it really makes a difference. And I think seeing it in school too, this translates into like class accommodations sometimes, or like you'll have to think about how to get accommodations for the bar or the MPRE, which is the multi-state performance something exam about ethics.
That
I
was
don't know yet. I haven't taken it. But these things are, it doesn't really stop with the LSAT, but this is a really great place to start if you are thinking that you might need some extra support, or there's things that you're just like, I can't get over this hurdle and I've studied. There's something else out there that's missing from the equation. So a little bit about me and my thoughts. I know I kind of rambled a little
no,
bit.
I think a big part of this is not only making sure that folks have access to the information about what is available to them. One thing that I always remember, just like from my own experience, is that resources aren't resources unless they're accessible, right? It's not, I don't consider it a resource if I don't know it exists, right? And if you're not making sure that students know and have access to, and also destigmatizing, I think, as you mentioned, like being able to know that there's nothing wrong with having access to accommodations and having all the information about them is like half of that step of that, oh, this is something that I can actually use and that can benefit me, and there's nothing wrong with that, and here's where to find information on it. So absolutely. And I think, right, sharing our own stories of like there are lots of folks who have various reasons why they might need additional support or different types of supports, and like that's also something that we should all talk about, is that accommodations, I we I think we need to be more aware of the fact that that's normal and that's okay. And so really, really thankful for that perspective. And I also am a rambler. So I'm with you on that 100%. I want to kind of dive into logistics for folks, because I think there are a lot of students who might not know They might know that they have a learning difference or that, they have test anxiety, but they're not exactly sure what kind of accommodations they might be able to access or that that's an option. And so I would love if we could start by talking about what are the categories of LSAT accommodations and kind of what goes on in that respect? What can students access that way?
Okay, so and this is I also should say like if you're somebody who is just gonna see this information and hear it like oh no, I'm gonna miss it. This is also on the LSAC website. It's written down, and again, it's like much more filled out and robust than it has been in the past. But there's a lot of different kinds of accommodations that are available, and I think people don't realize like we always hear about like extra time or breaks. There's even more, like in terms of the types of breaks. There's breaks between each section if you need it. There's start and stop breaks. If you're somebody who, like you might need a print copy of the test, that's something that you can request, and that's not something we always think about. For folks who need, like, if you use a screen reader on a typical basis or you have trouble seeing the size of print, I think that now they've worked on the software to make sure that the online version is actually screen reader accessible and that you can toggle the text size yourself. So you don't need an accommodation for that. Um, but like they've got a lot of different things. Like I've seen, oh goodness. There's sometimes they have people who read it for you if you really like if screen reader doesn't work. And I think I should say like it's a case by case basis. If there's something that they have on the website, like they have a list of possible accommodations, commonly requested accommodations. They also say what you don't need accommodations to bring. Like, for example, if you get really distracted, you can bring earplugs, regardless of whether that's, whether you would normally have an accommodation for that on a different exam or not. You can bring whatever types of writing utensils that you so desire. Before, like some people would have to request like colored pencils, and that's not the case anymore. Um, I would say, I've also seen people do like snacks. I'm not sure if that's currently I think you can bring juice boxes without an accommodation, but if you need to eat during the test, like sometimes you just have to ask for that just to make sure that you're allowed to have it. And that's especially if you are pregnant, if you're somebody who is managing diabetes or another condition where you just need to eat on a regular basis because the test is a long test. And if you can't make it during those breaks, it can be really difficult. But there's all sorts of things, and get creative because even if it's not on the website as a commonly requested accommodation, you're trying to think about the needs that you have, and so long as it's reasonable, they should grant it. Like that is your legal right under the ADA. Just saying. But a lot of these requests go into like these categories that LSAC will require, like different documentation, excuse me, based on what you're requesting. So in terms of like the formal categories, we have category one, category two, category three, and they're based off of really based off of extended time um, and how much you're requesting. So category one is your most simple type of accommodation request, and that's anything except for extended time. So that would be your print. That would be those extra stacks. I think start stop breaks might not be in that category. It's changed over the years. But if you're as long as you're not asking for extended time, that's like your double time, time and a half. That's your category one. The second category is for people who are requesting at least 50% extra time or time and a half. And that's I think category two is also people who do not have like the visual impairment um, or if you're requesting 100% extra time, so double time, and you have a visual impairment. So they're really kind of basing it off of your natural ability, the things that you're working with, and the time. The third category is like it's like the I think they call it exceptional needs, where it's more than 50% if you don't have a visual impairment, or it's more than 100% for folks who do. So usually requests will not fall in that category for the vast majority of people. Um, Most people are going to be in that category one or category two type of thing. So that those are the broad overviews, and they're separated out by category based on the types of documentation that you need. And I'll kind of pause
Well,
there, Monique, if you have like questions.
Yeah.
or folks
Yeah.
have questions on that. So no, it's confusing.
Yes. And I love
There's a lot of
like
information.
there are so many different layers to it, and I think it can be overwhelming for folks. I love that you pointed out like there are always multiple ways to engage the answers you need, and that's important too. Like I'm the kind of person where it's like I need to write out every single piece of what I'm thinking about or what my needs might be. Some people want to hear things like that spoken. Some people, and so whatever way you access it, if you're like, actually, I'm going to fast forward through this, and then I'm going to go to the LSAC website and be like, oh, I wanted to learn about this and this. You do that. But I think, though, another thing that I realized from as you were kind of going through the various accommodation options is that it isn't one size fits all, right? And so it might be that there are little things like you might need a snack. Like you're so right. I have encountered folks who are sort of expecting children, and they right their needs in their testing time look a little bit different than they might under other circumstances. That you should be able to access accommodations for something like that. And so knowing that, like, I think there are students who are like, oh, I don't have maybe certain types of access needs doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be a one size fits all, and you should still know what's available to you.
Right.
But I love that kind of overview where you talk about all the.
Yeah.
I
And
really
I think it's important. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
no, I hear it. Tell me.
Well, I think, just kind of being on that, it's not one size fits all, but I like people to anchor in what do you need?
Yeah.
Because you'd be surprised. Like it's kind of like this design thinking concept of like, how do I fix that need? Like, you'd be surprised. Like I don't even think they have this on the website, but you can request extra scratch paper. I've had students who've done that. And you think, okay, well, I wouldn't like if you like writing things out, of course that makes so much sense and it's reasonable. And
Yeah.
they do grant it. Like some people need to like pace while they're thinking. And I know typically you have to sit, you have to be in clear view for Proctor
Hmm.
U.
Yeah.
But that's something you can do. You can sit, you can stand. So there's all sorts of things. It's really a design thinking type of deal. But just because it's not on the website doesn't mean you can't request it. You just have to be able to back it up with your documentation.
I think that's like a fabulous sort of segue into some of the more logistical. Okay, I realize that I have some needs that an accommodation might be able to support me with during my LSAT prep, and making sure that I have what I need. When a student sort of reaches that point, whether it's through a mentor, through some like an advisor, is like maybe some of that gap is part of the problem. When in advance of their LSAT, should students start thinking about actually going about the process of, right, like how much time should a student budget to make sure that they have enough time to get all of their documentation, which we'll discuss, together and sort of approach the process without that stress?
It's going to depend on a couple of factors. I would say as early as you can, I would think about it because you don't want to be rushed, you don't want to be time. You have wiggle room if you're somebody who has a documented disability because you've probably already been in contact with your primary care specialist or a therapist who can just fix that for you, or you already have documentation on file. Um, Even if you do have accommodation documents already, though, if you don't have like a written word, it has lapsed in terms of the time will take more than 3 or 5 years. You're going to update the letter, and sometimes that can take time. If you're does not have, that's you're still sitting here thinking, okay, I have some needs. Someone who in a study group has identified something, or my mentor has identified something, teacher, my professor. That's okay. You're just a little bit more to actually be able to give you that documentation. So on documentation, you're going to have to provide like reference by either a medical professional or mental health professional who sign off on this thing, right? And so if you are not already connected, you have to get connected. That's the first step. Then you have to go and you have to talk to them. Then documents. Then you sit there and prove that process can take a long time, especially if you're busy. If they haven't seen you before, sometimes unfortunately it's just not. They know it's like, okay, this person's coming to me for this mistake. Can get lost. So I like folks to build it time. Sometimes we just don't have the energy, the time to always be doctor. I've seen unfortunately where to take next step. something from their doctor, and factor test. Other times, accommodated. So because there's ability, if you had an accommodation or if you haven't had a disability before, give yourself as much as possible. The caveat is that you have, like, for an actual exam, factor that people don't realize when they are processed. And there's ways you can work around that too. I've definitely seen for an exam and then try to put documentation in. They're not taking out the due necessarily. They actually in August, but they want their accommodation request. Um, or these forms are available in your website. You can on before you register for it and know what is in mind. So if you're someone who's like, I need to get stuff in as soon as possible, like you have to probably like a little bit. But if you are like, okay, I don't know when I'm in this exam, it might be this year, it might be next year, go ahead, get connection. You're a medical professional because it'll be so much easier. We're here for less stress. So really, to sum it up, it's like on your situation, but yourself to make that, get that relationship between mental health and medical health professionals. But better. I think I hear you.
Sorry, Monique, I can't hear you. I don't know what happened.